All right, guys, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the secret weapon me and my firm use to get phenomenal results for our clients. My name is Jamal Kersey, and I'm the principal attorney at Kersey Law. We're a boutique criminal defense firm in San Diego, California, and I've been doing this for 15 years, so I've got some experience under my belt. I've handled all kinds of difficult cases, from homicide, complex drug cases, basically you name it. We've handled it and successfully. And so before I get into this secret weapon we use to get phenomenal results for our clients, I'm curious as to your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think that secret weapon is? And so let me give you a couple of hints. It's not because I know the judges. The reality is I do know a lot of judges. I've said in other videos before, I was an intern at the San Diego District Attorney's Office during law school, and some of my supervisors have since made it to the bench, and so they're judges now, and they remember my reputation for working hard and giving my everything as an intern. But it's not my relationship with the judges. Same thing with DAs. You know, some of the guys I went to law school with, I was on the competitive mock trial team, and so some of my mock trial teammates are now DAs and they're in supervisor roles and things like that. It's not my relationship with the DAs. And it's also not because we have some sort of special magic wand we use to get the results. So let me know in the comments below what your guess as to what that secret weapon is. But before I actually reveal what it is, I want to be able to tell you in the context of a story. And we're going to use as an example a case that we had just this past week. And so this was a probation violation allegation. And before we actually get into what happened, I want to just give you some insight on how we actually got hired on this case, because it's really important to understand the result that happened, and it just puts everything into context. And so a lot of times when people get arrested or they're charged with a crime, somebody other than the person that's accused will give us a call. And whether that's a parent, you know, a girlfriend, a wife, or a brother or sister, you know, somebody else will call and say, hey, I have a family member that's in a jam. We have questions. We need some help. We want to know what should our next steps be. And so anytime somebody's in this situation, whether it's you or someone you know, I mean, I hope this never happens, but if it does, right? If somebody gets arrested, they're facing charges, they're under investigation, you need to reach out to a criminal defense attorney immediately. You need to treat it as the emergency that it really is. And it's critical. It really is critical and time sensitive that you get a professional involved sooner rather than later. And so this particular woman reaches out to our firm and she says, hey, you know, my fiance got arrested. He's in custody. I feel like I need to hire a lawyer. You know, and as we're having this conversation, you know, because we don't offer our services to everybody. You know, there is a certain criteria that a prospective client has to meet in order for us to offer our services to them, because we're just not for everybody, right? And she said, you know, she wants a lawyer, and I was asking her, hey, well, are you aware that, you know, there's a free option out there? There is a public defender. And she expressed, yes, I'm aware, but I don't want to go in that direction. You know, I want to hire a private defense attorney. I was also talking to her that, you know, there are other much cheaper options out there. You know, we're definitely not the cheapest option in town. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including but not limited to the fact that it's not just me, right? When you hire Kersey Law, there's not just one attorney and that's the only person you're interacting with. We have a whole team to help me get the phenomenal results that we get. We have another attorney in our office, Michelle Boss. She's amazing. We have our paralegal. We have our assistant. We have our law clerk. We have our intake specialist. We have our investigator. And so there's a full team behind what helps us get the best results possible. And that obviously costs money. They're not working for free, right? That's a whole payroll of individuals that need to be compensated and competitively. And so that, you know, that whole team effort is what leads us into being able to get the results that we get. And so, you know, she was particularly interested in quality, right? So we had this discussion. Quality, high quality really mattered to her. Experience mattered to her. Availability of time mattered to her. So she didn't want the lawyer who, is so slammed because they have so many cases that they can't give the case the attention that she felt like her fiance's case deserved. And so her fiance, on the contrary, right? So she had all these standards that she wanted in the attorney that she hired, but her fiance did not want to hire an attorney, right? He was concerned about the money. And, I get this. I completely understand. Nobody wants to have to shell out thousands of dollars to hire a criminal defense attorney, right? And earlier in the same week, I had another conversation with another family on this. And so they had consumed quite a bit of our materials. They felt like, hey, you're the guy. This is the firm I want to go with. But the problem was the fees were high, right? And she had expressed that. She's like, Mr. Kersey, I'd love to move forward with your firm, but the fees are high. It's expensive. And I told her, hey, I agree. I understand. We are not the cheapest in town, and I understand it's a pretty large financial commitment. But what I told her, and this is the truth, the people who do decide to hire our firm, they do so because they want quality. They want to be put in the best possible position for a favorable outcome. And that's what I commit to, right? That's all I can commit to, right? Because I can't guarantee any particular result. I'm not God. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't, predict what the outcome of the case is going to be. But in terms of our firm, what we bring to the table, our experience, our dedication, the amount of time we're going to invest, I would put us against any firm in the city. And that's what I can guarantee, that we will do everything in our power to put you in the best possible position for a favorable outcome. And she was ultimately sold on that because she could see the passion and the sincerity that I was expressing in telling her what we could bring to the table for her and her family. And so, I mentioned, hey, it's almost like when you have some problem with your car and you take it to the mechanic, you find out it's a transmission. They got to replace the transmission, and nobody wants to shell out $4,000 to replace a transmission, right? But if the transmission goes out and your car can't move anymore and you got to get to work and you got to be able to pick up your kids from daycare or whatever else you need for whatever else you need your car for, right? You either replace the transmission, right? You replace the car, or you take the bus. And all three of those options, suck. Like, none of those are happy options to have to choose, but something has to be done, right? So, you think about it, you'd rather spend that $4,000 if we're talking about a car. You'd rather get some nice rims, maybe a sound system, exhaust, or whatever you'd like to do to your car. But at the end of the day, this is an emergency and you have to put the money up to handle the problem. And so, at the end of the day, going back to the original person we were talking about, her fiance's freedom just meant so much more to her than the money. So she decided to move forward. And that, that's always really, if we're talking about a financial discussion, that's what it comes down to. This money that you have sitting in the bank or you have available on a credit card, does that mean more than the freedom? If the freedom and fighting for the freedom means more, then you spend the money, right? And so she decided to move forward. It was a very wise decision, as you'll see. And in this situation, again, he was alleged to have committed a probation violation. So when we're talking about a probation violation, there's going to be an underlying offense that was committed that landed the person on probation, right? And so in this case, it was possession of a controlled substance and possession of a firearm, right? So he had been convicted of a felony and he was placed on probation. And so he was sentenced to just a couple of months, right? So he was sentenced to a couple months in jail and placed on probation for 3 years, right? And so when you're placed on probation versus sentenced to prison, it's almost like giving you an opportunity to prove yourself, right? Because if you commit a felony where you could be sentenced to prison, if they say, you know what, we could sentence you to prison, right? Between the DA and the judge and probation, they're saying, hey, this is an offense where you would be eligible to go to prison, but you have little to no criminal history, you've been employed, all the good things that you have going on. Let's give you a shot. Let's put you on probation. And obviously, if you perform well, you don't violate the law, then you're not going to have had to go to prison, right? In that situation, the judge has between no days in jail all the way up to 365 days that they can put you in jail in order to give you probation, right? And so in this situation, there were a couple of issues, and the judge had been offended by one of those issues. So the judge said, hey, I'm going to give you these couple of months in jail, and then you're going to be out on probation. But if I see you again in my courtroom, if you violate probation, I'm going to send you to jail for 365 days, right? So when you're on probation, you have to comply with the terms. Like, you need to follow those orders to a T. Sometimes people who have sort of a rebellious personality end up on probation. I'm like, hey, you need to put that to the side. You need to be a choir boy at this point while you're on probation, because when the judge gives you a warning like that, it's not a game, right? When they say, I'm going to put you in jail for 365 days if you violate, that's exactly what they mean, right? And so, on this particular situation, they asked him to check in to probation on a particular day, and unfortunately, he failed to do so. And as a result, a warrant was issued. And unfortunately, if you have an alleged probation violation, then you can't bail out, right? They'll put you on a no bail hold based on you violating probation. Whereas, in other situations, if you get a domestic violence case and it's a felony, they might set bail at, say, $50K. If it's a misdemeanor, it might be $10K. If it's a DUI, it might be $2,500, whatever it is. But if it's a probation violation, no matter how minimal it is, they'll put it at no bail and you can't get out of custody. So we had already been hired. Fiance ends up hiring us, and I wanted to go to jail so I could get the story, right? So I go to jail, I go to visit him, and we start to talk about his story, right? And obviously we knew that, he was engaged or in a long-term relationship. He had been with his fiance for a few months, but they had actually known each other since high school. So this was like a long-term ordeal. And one of the important pieces of information was that he's a dad. Right? So his son is 10 years old and he's had 100% custody since day one. So that was not only impactful in terms of how important it was for him to be able to get out of custody to get back to his son, but also it just says a lot, right? It says a lot for a dad to have 100% custody. And this was really important because we know when it comes to custody arrangements or even custody battles, a lot of times the mother ends up winning or having the more favorable outcome. So for this guy to have 100% custody was very meaningful. Also important was the fact that he was playing somewhat of a stepdad role as well to his fiance's kids. And the other thing is we learned that he has a kid on the way. So fiance is pregnant and now he's in jail. The fact that his fiance was pregnant is really important too, because, who wants to be in jail and not working and providing for your family when you have a baby that's on the way, right? So, he had graduated from high school. And he's always worked. Having a solid employment history is important too, because it shows that you haven't just been sitting around doing nothing with your life. You've actually been employed. You've been productive. So he had done about a semester of college and, unfortunately it didn't work out for him. And this is important to know, that school is not for everyone, but you can absolutely be successful and do amazing things in your life without going to college, right? Whether you go to college or not, you can be successful. And I think that's really important for people to know. But other than that, he was always employed. He was doing loading and unloading and stocking for many years. And again, being gainfully employed is really good. And most recently, he had a really good job for about 5 years, right? So he was working for a temp agency as an HVAC technician. And then he got hired on full time, was working with this company for another 3 years. And then he was elevated to a supervisory role. So for a whole year, he was a supervisor with this particular company. And unfortunately, he had been let go from the company because he was working on ships. And so the availability of work depended on how many ships were in the yard. And for whatever reason, there were less ships in the yard. And so he ended up getting let go. And one of the things we talked about in the context of his work as an HVAC technician is he was telling me how, he knows how to control the movement of air through different parts of a building. And, I just thought that was really fascinating because I couldn't tell you the first thing about how to move air through a building. I know how to turn on a thermostat. I know how to set it to automatic. But in terms of directing the air to where it needs to go and maintaining temperature in that way, I couldn't tell you the first thing about that. And I, in particular, I just love hearing people talk about things that they're passionate about. I love hearing people talk about what they're good at. And being an excellent lawyer has just as much to do, if not perhaps more, with how much you listen and your ability to listen just as much as your ability to talk and communicate. And so anyhow, he had been on unemployment because, the job had let him go and the time was running out. So there was already pressure on him that, hey, I've been on unemployment and I have a kid on the way. I don't have a job. I need to figure something out. And so he took the initiative to take a 40-hour asbestos class. He had already done some sort of schooling to become an HVAC technician. So now he took another class in order to become proficient in asbestos. And this was to make himself more attractive in the job market. And I was just like, man, props to you, right? Like you're in a situation, you had a really good job for 5 years, and you could be in a situation where you're like, woe is me. There's nothing I can do. I can't find a job. But nah, what did he do? He went to level up, invested time and money in himself to develop new skills in order to make himself more attractive in the job market. And I just thought that was amazing. And maybe you could use that for yourself, right? If you find yourself stuck in a rut, maybe you can go and take an online course. Maybe you can go to your local community college and just learn a new skill to add to your toolbox in order to make yourself more attractive in the market. But that's just a side note. So interestingly enough, he had gone into custody on it was like a Wednesday or Thursday, but on Friday, he had received a note saying, hey, are you willing to come back? We have we have availability for your old position. We'd love to have you back. And this was his job where he was making $30 an hour. So this was a really good job, and he couldn't take advantage because he was in custody. And so that was devastating for him, right? To have been on unemployment this long and then have the opportunity to take advantage of his old job and then be in custody and not take advantage. So that was all the more pressure for him to need to get out of custody so that he could be like, hey, yeah, I'm down to come back. Give me my old job, right? We were talking about that whole situation. And then we started talking about the underlying offense, right? Why you were on probation in the first place. So I didn't represent him on the underlying offense. So I wanted to know more about what was going on. And so this is really important because as I'm making representations to the judge, as I'm making representations to the DA, as I'm making representations to the probation officer, I need to know the details. So I'm not saying, hey, my client is a peaceful, loving person. And then I find out, the underlying felony was a case where he savagely knocked somebody out because he was drunk and high, right? You want to make sure that, you don't make some sort of argument and then they can say, well, counsel, what you're telling me does not, I can't reconcile what you're telling me with what I have in this file, right? So you need to know the good, the bad, the ugly about the underlying offense. So that's what we talked about. And so again, this was possession of a firearm, possession of a controlled substance. He had been pulled over for a broken taillight, and someone in the vehicle was on a fourth waiver. So that led to police searching the vehicle, and they found a gun and a nominal amount of drugs, right? And so I knew that he had only done a couple of months on the case. So I knew it wasn't like the crime of the century, right? There could be a case where, guns and drugs are involved and the person ends up doing a few years, right, in prison, right? So if he only did a couple of months, then I know it wasn't the crime of the century. He was put on probation. That meant that all parties were in agreement that he deserved an opportunity to prove himself, right? But again, the judge had made this warning saying, hey, if I see you again, I don't care what the violation is, I'm putting you in custody for 365 days in jail. And again, you have to heed to these warnings because these judges are not playing. I'm blown away by how so many people get these type of warnings, they mess up, and then the judge does exactly what he said he'd do, right? I told you I was going to put you in jail. I'm ordering you to go to jail, and you're like, man, it's not fair. No, well, they gave you fair warning, and you decided that you were just going to live your life however you wanted and not abide by the terms of probation. It's just so important that you follow those rules. And so, again, he got this warning, right? He got the warning if he messed up, and now he's in jail. So, I wanted to talk about what happened, right? Like, if you got this warning that you're going to be in jail for a year, like, how did you end up violating probation, right? Why would you subject yourself to facing a year in jail? And so life is fascinating, right? Things are not always as they seem. And, I'm sure we've all had situations where you can really believe that something happened the way that you conjure up in your mind based on the information that you have at the time. And then you're presented with new information and you realize that you were wrong, right? And this is one of those things, right? Because the assumption would be, hey, you were given this date that you were ordered to present yourself to probation. You missed it because you didn't care, right? You didn't take it seriously. You thought you could just do whatever you want. But this was not the case, right? He actually ended up confusing the dates, right? So he was supposed to appear on June 5th. He ended up, he thought that was June 7th, right? And it might have been something on the paper. It was like a carbon copy. Sometimes those can be a little hard to read, especially if you fold them up, put it in your pocket, right? And the, just the ink that pressed through, you're not able to see. But either way, right? You get the dates confused by 2 days, and look how much that can just throw your world upside down and put you in a bad jam, right? Understand, right? And this is what I told him. Listen, you confusing these dates, this is not some sort of legal defense. It's not a justification, but it is a reason, right? It's a reason, and it's an understandable reason, right? We're just human elements. We all make mistakes. And he had told me that his mom had the document at the house, and they had a conversation because he knew that week he needed to go into probation. And between the discussion between them two, they thought that it was on the Friday versus the Wednesday, right? And so I asked him, all right, well, you're telling me, your mom knew about this and you guys both believed it was on the Friday, right? I'm like, if I call your mom, right? If I call your mom, is she going to say that this was the same confusion, or is she going to act like, or not act like, is she going to have no idea what we're talking about? In which case that's going to be a problem. He's like, nah, my mom will tell you, right? So I'm like, okay, give me your mom's number and I'll give her a call, and that'll be helpful, right? Because if I can tell the DA and probation and the judge, hey, this was a confusion, and I actually spoke with his mother, who also affirmed that this is a mistake, they're embarrassed about it. So it's not just my client completely disregarded the order and, is disrespecting the court, right? And so, that's where everything he told me came into play, right? In terms of the work history, the asbestos class he had just taken, the fact that he has 100% custody over his son, right? So he had way too much positive things going on in his life to just screw off checking in with probation, right? Because how hard is it to go in and have whatever conversation, whatever they wanted to talk about with probation, right? It wasn't like they were going to take him into custody or anything he hadn't otherwise violated. So it really wouldn't be that hard. On top of that, he wasn't working, so there were no restrictions on his time to be able to show up. So we had to talk about what we were going to propose as a solution, right? Because, there is no denying that he violated probation, because for probation violations, what you have is, you come in in an order to show cause. That's what, the type of hearing it's called, an order to show cause regarding violation of probation. And if you deny having violated probation, then they have what's called an evidentiary hearing. So, if if you're charged with a crime, then the end, contested hearing would be a trial, right? A trial in front of a jury where the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you violated the law. But in a probation violation, it goes to an evidentiary hearing, and the standard is just a preponderance of the evidence. So they don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you violated probation. They just have to tip the scale, 51-49, right? If they can tip the scale and say that you violated, then, you're going to be found to have violated probation. So there was no point in arguing that he did not violate probation. So we were going to admit the probation violation, but we needed to come up with an argument as to, what should be the penalty. Because again, we already know that the judge had already said, if you violate probation, I'm going to sentence you to 365 days in jail. So my number one goal at this point was to keep him out of custody, right? We had to fight for allowing him to get another chance to just basically be able to prove himself, right? Probation, again, is all about the second chances. You believed in him enough to put him on probation. This was a relatively minor violation. Give him a second chance, right? And this is a thing about probation. And I think sometimes or oftentimes people's mentality about probation is wrong, right? People will say, man, probation, they're just setting me up to fail, or they just know I'm going to violate, or they're going to try to violate. No, listen. If you got put on probation, you could have been in prison, right? So let's put things in perspective. You could be in prison right now, but you got a chance to be on probation, and all you have to do is stay on the straight and narrow, right? You might have to switch up your decision making. You might have to switch up, your actions. You might have to switch up the type of people that you keep around you, your influences. But it's really not that hard to, get a good job, focus on doing well. If you have some substance abuse issues, getting treatment. If you have alcohol issues, being in AA, finding God, going to church, doing whatever you got to do to make sure that you don't go back into custody. And I know sometimes that can be easier said than done, but what do you want to do? Just do you want to dive into those limiting negative beliefs and just set yourself up for failure? Or do you want to take this as the golden opportunity to do the right thing? He, in particular, wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. He didn't want to go back into custody. So there was an alternative, right? So I really wanted to keep him out of custody. But if that wasn't going to work, then I wanted to pitch him doing work furlough. And work furlough is a program that allows you to maintain your job, right? So you're going to be in a camp setting. So at night, you have to sleep in this camp setting. You're technically in custody, but during the day, you can go to your job, right? And so this allows you to continue to earn, make money, be able to save money, get it to your family so that, you have some savings in the bank when your new baby comes. And so this isn't ideal, right? You're still in custody, but it's better than jail, right? If you're in jail, you're not making money, right? But at least if you're in work furlough, you're able to earn for your family. And if that weren't to happen, right, if probation, the DA, and the judge were against that, then I'd ask for minimal jail time, right? I know that you already said that you would sentence him to 365, but can we do 30 days? Can we do 45 days? Right? So this conversation between me and my client lasted for 2 hours, right? So we spent 2 hours going through education history, work history, the underlying facts of the felony case, why he violated, what this means to him, how it's going to affect his life, his son's life, his fiance's life, her kid's life, his mother's life, everyone's lives that are going to be affected if he has to go to jail for a prolonged period. I felt good about all the information we had gotten, right? And he was nervous, right? Naturally, right? He had already been warned by the judge as to what was going to happen. So he felt nervous, but he felt good, right? Because he had an opportunity to be heard. He had an opportunity to say his piece in terms of why he, committed this violation, how it was not going to happen again, and why, he just didn't really mean to do this, right? And so the interesting thing is this case, it was a public defender case because he had been represented by the public defender's office in the underlying felony. And the hearing was going to be the next morning, and no one had spoken to him yet, right? So he hadn't spoken to anybody about the violation, what happened, or anything like that. So he was just really relieved that he got an opportunity to get all that information out. So I get out of the jail. It's still early in the afternoon, so business hours are still in operation. And so I called the DA because I wanted to get an understanding of where she was coming from. And also I wanted to let her know, hey, I'm Jamal Kersey. I've been retained on this matter. I'll be appearing in the morning and introduce myself, have a discussion about the facts, what her position was, what she was going to be asking for, right? So I caught her actually before, she was actually right in the middle of preparing, right? So she, as the DA, she was there on the whole calendar. So she has 30 matters that she's preparing for the next morning. So she's looking at the little blurb in the file in terms of what the violation was, what the criminal history was, what probation's recommendation is, and then she has to come up with what her recommendation to the judge is going to be if there's an admission of a violation. So she was preparing my client's case right when I called her. So, anytime I can actually reach out and speak to a prosecutor informally before what's going to be a contested hearing, I like to do so. At the end of the day, the criminal justice system is what's called adversarial, right? So there's two sides fighting for each other's position. And, when we're on the record, right, when the case is called and I'm answering Jamal Kersey on behalf of my client, they're answering, John Smith for the people, we're fighting, right? So this isn't the time for us to reason with each other and be pleasant, right? Each side is fighting for each side for their respective positions. But when we're on a call, when it's an informal discussion, it's different, right? And I'll tell you, I have had passionate discussions with the DA where, what I'm saying is what our version is, and what they're saying is what their version, and they're just really contested and, almost getting into a heated debate. But it's still worth having the discussion because there might be certain things we see eye to eye on, and then other things that we just can't agree on. But at least we had an opportunity to talk things out. And I can't tell you how many times where I present the DA with new information that they didn't have in their file on things that there's no way that they could have known, right? Because nobody knows more about a case than the person who's accused of committing the crime, right? And if I'm able to present them information and it's persuasive and they're like, oh, okay, well, I didn't look at it that way, or I didn't know that could, cause them to change their whole stance, and even in some instances lead to a dismissal, right? So we're having this discussion, and she says, she's sort of ambivalent on it. She doesn't entirely care one way or the other, but she says probation was going to ask for 90 days, right? So probation, when they do their evaluation, they're also going to give a recommendation to the judge. And I'm thinking, man, 90 days is not ideal, right? And a lot of times the judge is going to follow probation's recommendation, right? Because probation, for the most part, is in the best position to be able to present to the judge the information that the judge needs to know, right? Because the person has been in contact with a probation officer, so they know if they have to do routine check-ins, if they have to do random drug testing, if they're supposed to do certain counseling, the probation department is on top of all that stuff. And so when they make a recommendation, again, that oftentimes is persuasive to the judge as to what they're going to do. So she had said, well, I'm just going to submit on what probation is going to recommend, right? So she wasn't going to make an argument one way or the other. So it came down to what probation was going to say, what my argument was going to be, and then what the judge ultimately decided. And then she mentioned what it was that I already knew, which was that the judge had indicated that, he was going to sentence him to 365 if he had violated. And so I was like, okay, well, I know that I'm up against that wall, but we're going to see what we can do. So I had called his mom, right, because I needed to follow up with her to confirm that confusion regarding the dates. And so I called her, let her know who I was, said, hey, we have this issue, probation violation. It's relatively serious, right? Because, probation wants to give him 90 days. And so you might think, well, 90 days isn't 10 years, right? But think about it, 90 days, even if you have to do just half with good time, or even if they somehow give you less than half, let's just say it's 30 days. Like, do you want to give up 30 days of your life and be in jail and not be able to provide for your family, miss out on a job opportunity, not be at home, with your family? Like, no, nobody wants to go to jail for any amount of time. So even a 90-day sentence was going to be problematic. But on top of that, we're looking at a potential of 365 days, right? So I wanted to do everything that I could in order to get the information that I needed to make the best argument. So the next morning, I show up to court. I let the public defender know, hey, I'm substituting in as counsel of record. And she had let me know what probation's recommendation was, because, they'll usually send their recommendation over to defense counsel. So she's like, yeah, their recommendation is 90 days, kind of, in that, good luck type tone, right? Because, she knew. Right. She knew that probation was asking for 90. The judge might impose 365. So it was kind of a difficult situation. Right. So I actually ended up speaking to the probation officer who was there, and she affirmed that, yeah, I'm going to be asking for 90 days based on this violation. Well, she did not have my client's perspective, right? All she had in her file was client was supposed to show up on June 5th. He didn't show up. That's a violation. There was no phone call. There was no email. There was no explanation. This is just somebody thumbing their nose at the system. So, we're going to teach you a lesson by sending you to jail for 90 days, right? So then I actually explained to her what the story was. I was like, hey, I sat down with my client for a couple hours yesterday, and the reality is this is, it was just a mix-up, right? This was, it was just a mistake, and he feels sorry about it. I explained, how it happened. And when I gave her the condensed story, right, because a lot of times you're going to have, maybe your 10-minute version, your 30-second version, your 5-minute version. So I gave her my version of the story. And ultimately she said, I'm not going to fight you on that. And that was pretty, that was nice, right? I was relieved by the fact that she said, I'm not going to fight you on that. I understand where you're coming from. And so the thing is, if she had learned this position for the first time while we're on the record, she might have fought me on it, right? But since I had this discussion and was able to put it in context, then she was able to see, right? Because we're having this informal discussion in the relaxed, setting of us just having a conversation versus being on the record. She could see how this was a reasonable position in terms of what happened. And I thanked her. I thanked her for being reasonable, because not all of them are. There are so many DAs, probation officers, police officers, judges that can be just so myopic and rigid, and they just seem to forget about the human element and how challenging life can be and how we can make simple mistakes, but we don't deserve to have the book thrown at us, right? And so, she was just really fair in that sense, and I was appreciative of that. And she and the DA had mentioned, well, hey, the judge had indicated 365 days. So, you got to deal with that. And I'm like, all right, well, we'll handle that. So the case eventually ends up getting called, and the judge asked, all right, well, we're here on a probation violation. Does your client admit or deny the violation? And we admitted, right? And he asked if I wanted to be heard as to what the sentencing should be. And I said yes, right? And I gave him all the details in terms of everything that I had collected, right, in those 2 hours to provide the context as to why he violated the order. Because, it is black and white. You either showed up to your appointment or you didn't, right? But there was a reason behind it. Again, it wasn't necessarily a valid excuse or a legal justification. It's not like an outright defense to to the violation. But, I had told the judge that I impressed upon my client, hey, listen, when the judge orders you to do something, when probation tells you that you have to do certain things, you have to do it. You absolutely must abide by those orders. And if there's going to be a reason for which you can't do it, you need to call and let people know. Call me so I can call them, or call them directly. Do whatever you have to do, but you can't just, fail to comply with an order. And so I think, you can just body language. You can feel when someone's kind of jiving with what you're saying. And I look over, I see my client, and he's like, yeah, I like it. I like it. Right. And I actually, I went on for quite some time. My argument was much longer than a lot of the other lawyers that were, stating their position. And I'm not saying that's not a knock against anybody else. And actually, I was almost overstaying my welcome in terms of how long I should have been in front of the judge. But I felt like I had to do it, right? Because you can also, you can get the sense when the judge is like, okay, I get it. I get it. But the thing is, he wasn't going to tell me in that moment, right? I wouldn't know until I'm done with my argument the sentence that the judge was going to impose, right? And you have to understand that the judge was prepared and had indicated in his notes and on the record that if you mess up, I'm going to put you in jail for 365 days. So I needed to do everything that I could to basically give the judge a way to save face by giving him another chance, right? Because if I were just like, oh, well, he messed up, it was a mistake, do him a solid, then he's got to go back on his word because he told him, listen, I don't care what the violation is. If you mess up, I'm going to put you in jail for 365 days. So there, if I gave him all these reasons, right? Ample reasons why he should get another shot. Like he had a great job for 5 years. This company wants him back. He's got a kid on the way. He's got 100% custody of his 10-year-old son. He had all the incentive in the world to show up to this meeting, and he just mistook the dates. He doesn't deserve to be in custody any longer than he already has been because at this point, it had already been a week, right? Allow him to get out of custody. I mean, he was placed on probation for a reason. You guys wanted to give him a shot for a reason. You guys believed in him for a reason. So allow him to get out, allow him to get his job back so he can provide for his family and successfully complete the rest of his probation, right? I mean, the fact that this employer wanted him back speaks to his good character, right? If you get let go from a job and they ask to have you come back, especially in a supervisory role, right? Amongst all the potential candidates that there are for a good job, they're asking for you. That says a lot about your good character. And we were able to leverage that as far as reasons that the judge should give him another chance, right? And so, with all these positive things that he had going on, again, why would he just, completely disregard showing up to court? Why would he just say, well, I don't care. I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm not going to check in, right? That didn't make sense. So I asked the judge, we're asking for credit for time served. He's been in jail for a week. Please, just give him another chance. I'm confident that he's not going to violate again, right? And so the judge, he listened to the argument, and in the end, he gave him the credit for time served. He didn't give him the 365 days in jail. Client got out that same day. And I want you to think about the generational impact from this, right? Because again, 90 days, even, the 90 days that probation was originally recommending, that's not all that much time, right? But think about that. You miss out on a really good job opportunity, right? You are in jail for, again, if it's at half, you're going to do 45 days. That's a month and a half. It's a month and a half of earnings that you're not contributing to the rent at home, that you're not helping your fiance out, that you're not, being able to save money to provide for your kids' Pampers, your kids' baby formula, your kids' baby clothes, buying a stroller, all those important things that you need to take care of a kid, right? In addition to just having some savings set aside, right, for those emergency things. But now, he's able to, he got out of custody, that same day. A little later in the day, he got out of custody. He's able to call that employer back. Hey, I want my job back, and do his thing. And so that secret weapon that I was talking about was the investment of time. I tell young lawyers all the time, I tell my team, there is no substitute for spending time with your client. And, sometimes that's me. Sometimes it's Marisa, our paralegal. Sometimes it's Daniel, our law clerk. Sometimes it's our other lawyer, Michelle, whoever it is. Sometimes it's our investigator spending that time to, go to a scene and take pictures and shoot video, just go out and talk to other witnesses. There just is no substitute for investing time into a case, because you can see how, again, the violation is black and white. You either showed up to the appointment or you didn't. And he didn't, but there was a story behind it. And by taking that time, taking those 2 hours to sit down and get to know him better, because not only do we get to know, our client's side of the story as it relates to the actual case, but we get to know our client's story as who they are as a person, because that can oftentimes be the one thing that really helps us to make the best argument to get the result that we need. And the interesting thing is, and again, no knock to anybody, no knock to the public defender's office. At least in San Diego, we have very passionate advocates. We have very good public defenders, but nobody had spoken to my client yet, right? So when I went in there and spent that 2 hours with him, nobody had spoken to the client. So the only opportunity there would have been to talk to him would have been the morning of the hearing. And as I mentioned, that public defender had numerous cases that, she was assigned, right? And so this was something that the fiance, and this is where it comes full circle, she realized, there were a number of hearings that, that she heard, right? The fiance heard where that same public defender made the appearance, right? So she had, the courtroom opens at a certain amount of time. The people in jail are brought over at a certain amount of time. So between when they're over, which might be, 8:40, 8:45, the calendar starts at 9. So maybe in 15 minutes, 20, even if it's 30, in 30 minutes, how much time you have to spend with 15 or 20 people. It's definitely not going to be the 2 hours to get all that information that we got that really made an impact. And I can almost guarantee that if we had not gotten all that information, the judge was fully prepared to sentence him to a whole year just for missing an appointment. So let me know, did you get it right? If you made a guess as to what that secret weapon is, let me know. Were you right? Were you completely wrong? Were you surprised by the outcome? If you made it this far, I definitely appreciate you watching. If you got something out of this video, please show me some love, hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, turn on the notifications, and leave me a comment. Again, if you learned something new, I would definitely appreciate it. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and until next time. Peace.